Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Matt Abbott, and I am the Director of Government and Diplomatic Programs at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thank you all, and especially our members, for joining us for today's On the Record program. It's my honor to welcome you to the Council's inaugural program in our new Hart Program Series on Latin America. Before we start the conversation, please note that the Council is a nonprofit, independent, and nonpartisan platform. The views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. We will take questions from the audience after our moderated discussion. If you'd like to submit a question, please type ccga.live into your web browser. I'd also like to thank Ambassador Reina Torres, the Consul General of Mexico in Chicago, and her outstanding team at the consulate for their assistance on this program. And this program would not be possible without the generous support of Rob and Kitty Lansing and their family. This new program series succeeds a fellowship program at the Council that was established in honor of Kitty Lansing's father. We are so grateful for their generosity that has allowed the Council to engage with leaders from Latin America and highlight the deep ties between Chicago and the region. It's now my honor to introduce Kitty Lansing for some remarks and to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Matt. I am happy to be able to introduce our speaker for the new Hart Program Series. I have to put my glasses on. The Hart Program Series on Latin America was established in honor of our father, Gus Hart, who is a former chairman of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Previously, the program existed as a fellowship for emerging leaders from Latin America and the Caribbean that welcomed a total of 11 fellows to Chicago for a public lecture and meetings with community leaders to expand each fellow's network. The program series continues and expands this legacy by exploring key issues in the Latin American and Caribbean region, while highlighting and deepening Chicago's ties with the region. I want to just say a few words about our father on behalf of all my siblings and the Hart family. Dad was the international head of Quaker Oats, and so thus spent a lot of time developing Quaker's business in Latin America. He traveled there in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and was always very interested and gained a great deal of knowledge about the economy, about the political situations in Latin America. And he spent probably 3 or 4 months every year of his 30 years there. And he was always a little surprised when he'd come back to the States and realize how few Americans knew much about Latin America. And so as a result, when our father died in 1999, our family established this forum with the council as a way of providing and creating, enhancing relationships with Latin America. So as part of that, we are very pleased today. I am pleased today to be able to introduce our first speaker of the series, Senor Roberto Velasquez, who is the head of the unit for North America in the Secretariat of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. He's over a decade of experience in the Mexican federal, state, and local public sector. He served as a strategy and policy coordinator to Pro-Mexico's NAFTA regional direction in Washington, D.C. After the presidential elections in July 2018, he was invited by the designate Secretary of Foreign Relations, Mr. Marcelo Ebrard, to support the transition process. At the Secretariat of Foreign Relations, he served as Director General for Public Affairs and Director General for North America. Since March 2021, Senor Velasco is head of the unit for North America. He holds a master's degree in public policy from the University of Chicago, where he was also the Chicago Policy Reviews Editor-in-Chief, and a Bachelor of Law from the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. We are very pleased to have him as our speaker today, and we look forward to hearing his views and his insight on U.S.-Mexican relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kitty. And Mr. Velasco, on behalf of the Council, welcome to our platform. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with our members.
Thank you very much, Matt and Kitty, for the very generous introduction. And also for the invitation to speak with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, which is a place that I hold deeply in my heart because I spent many hours as a student listening to your events and participating in different meetings and other events that you invited me to when I was in Chicago. Also, I would like to thank Ambassador Reina Torres, our Consul General in Chicago, for making this event possible. We are very well represented in Chicago by Ambassador Torres, who's one of our best Consul Generals and a member of our Foreign Affairs Service. So Matt, I don't know if you would like me to make some initial comments or you would like to go straight into questions. Tell me what works better.
Absolutely. I'll start with a question. The United States and Mexico are important economic partners, and Mexico is the United States' second largest trading partner, as well as its second largest export market. With this robust economic relationship already in place, how can both countries work together to enhance economic security and prosperity in North America?
Well, actually, right now, the two countries are preparing to relaunch the high-level economic dialogue that will happen on September the 9th in Washington, D.C. And well, naturally, one of the points, for example, that we're looking at for the agenda is how to make the supply chains between Mexico and the United States and in all of North America more resilient when we're facing situations like this pandemic or other natural disasters. Another objective of this high-level economic dialogue is to relocate further parts of the supply chains in a region in order to have not only greater economic prosperity, but also to be safer when it comes to situations like this. What we saw when the pandemic started was that many elements of critical supply chains were very far from our own neighborhood. And that created many problems for supply, for example, for the medical supply chain and for the pharmaceutical supply chain. So we're trying to bring some of those elements closer to home in countries where we're allies. Some refer to this idea as ally shoring, which is a very good concept that I know for example, the USMCA Foundation is using. So that is another of the objectives of the high-level dialogue. Also, we're looking, for example, at cybersecurity, how we can make the transfer of information, the flow of information and data between our countries safer, especially when the networks between our countries are so much integrated, and obviously when we share such a big border. And the border in itself is also going to be another focus of this dialogue. We're looking at how we can have infrastructure that is modern, that is safer, and that allows for goods to cross faster and easier between the two countries. Right now, we have few barriers in terms of legal issues. We don't have any tariff barriers because we have the USMCA and previously we had the NAFTA. So the main barrier to trade are the waiting times along the border. So that is something that the two countries are trying to address. And hopefully in this dialogue, we'll find a space, and political will to really, give a big boost to some of these projects that we have for the border. So that is an example of what we're doing. And also very important to say, the main idea of this high-level economic dialogue, and it's also something that goes hand in hand with the USMCA, is to further integrate our countries and to sort of draw the vision of what we want together for the US and Mexico and for North America as a region when we see what is happening with other regions of the world that are becoming also very competitive, that are becoming prosperous. So how do we keep North America to be one of the most competitive or the most competitive regions in the world? That is sort of the vision that we want to create through this dialogue and that we also tried to further with the USMCA.
Thank you very much. And on the topic of the USMCA, which entered into force last year, how is this agreement transforming economic relations in North America?
Well, I think firstly, and I would say that's the most important, the USMCA provided a framework that sustained certainty for the investment, for the trade that happens between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. We went through a period of great uncertainty when this trade agreement was being renegotiated. And that, for example, in the case of Mexico and Canada, created problems even for our currencies. So to have the USMCA, to have this framework is important in itself because it allows the companies and the people who make businesses between our countries to know what are the rules and that our countries are still open for business and that we want to keep this trade that is so important now, and especially when we have supply chains that are so integrated and products that cross sometimes 7 or 8 times across the border until they are a finished product. So that again is important in itself. Secondly, I would say there are new sectors in the USMCA that did not exist in the previous version. I would highlight 2 or 3 new things of the USMCA. Firstly, we have now digital trade included in the treaty, which is important. Now, this is one of the biggest businesses in the 2 countries. So it was important to have a framework for this commerce to happen orderly and to happen within a framework that was mutually agreed by the 3 countries of North America. Secondly, we now have a chapter for small and medium enterprises. We have a vision to include small and medium enterprises in the treaty, which is also something new and very important because part of what the 3 countries want is to have an economic development, an economic growth that is more inclusive and that helps us all to bridge the inequalities that we have in our societies and the inequalities that we have between our countries. So it was very important to include SMEs in this agreement. And also the fact that we have, for example, some provisions on gender equality is something that is super important for us and that we believe is something very, very positive for the 3 societies. Another important point, naturally, is what has to do with labor. That is probably the newest or the most different thing in the USMCA. We don't have anything similar to that in any other trade agreement, and I don't know if the US does, but I believe it doesn't either. I believe this is the first trade agreement that actually includes this kind of labor protections. So what this has behind is this vision for Mexico not to compete on the basis of cheap labor, but to compete on the basis of the many different advantages that we have, not only because of our proximity to the United States, but also because of the skills of our workforce, because of the stability of our fiscal framework, for example, and obviously because of the costs of life in Mexico and many other things. So that is very important. And what we want to do is, and this goes, together with what was I saying in the regarding the high-level economic dialogue, that we want to further integrate the supply chains, and we want to bring parts of the supply chains that were not in our country, to the United States, to Canada, and that will help us all, obviously, to bring new business to our region, but also, would help us to bridge this inequality that was in the previous vision, where some workers in Mexico were receiving, very good salaries, but other areas of the country, other workers in our country were not receiving those benefits of trade. So those are, I would say, are some of the important areas. But we also have now all these committees that were created with the USMCA, for example, a committee on competitiveness, a committee on trade facilitation that are working now in order to see how we can improve the trade that happens between our countries.
Thank you very much. Turning now to the pandemic, can you update us on the current state of the COVID-19 pandemic in Mexico, and how are the US and Mexico working together on pandemic response?
Well, as in many other countries, we're looking right now at an increase in cases in our country. Happily, The vaccination rates in Mexico have climbed significantly in the past few months. And we're looking now at a new wave that is less lethal than the previous waves of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is something that is very important. We are moving very fastly with the vaccination program in Mexico. We are applying right now an average of, I believe, over 700,000 vaccines a day, which is right now evidently higher than the vaccination rates in the United States. And for example, in some cities in the Mexican side of the border, we have higher vaccination rates than those that are their neighbors in the United States. So that process is moving very quickly, and we are trying to have all of the adult population in Mexico vaccinated before the winter, which is obviously something very important if we want to avoid new waves of the pandemic. The collaboration with the United States government in this issue has been very broad, and we are very thankful with the US government for many issues in which we've received significant cooperation to attend to this pandemic. In the first part of the pandemic, we worked to get mechanical ventilators to Mexico. And then we started working for the new pharmaceuticals that were being developed for the COVID-19. Mexico participated in the clinical trials, for example, for medications like remdesivir and for the one that was developed by Regeneron, which is a monoclonal treatment, monoclonal antibody treatment. That was another important collaboration. We also participated in a clinical trial that Novavax conducted for their vaccine, which were all things that we agreed with the government of the United States. And after that, we've been working together in mainly two sets of issues. Firstly, to bring more vaccines to Mexico, where we've received some very significant help from the United States. We just announced yesterday that in the next few days, we will be receiving an additional 1.75 million doses of the Moderna vaccine in Mexico. We've already received 1.35 million doses of Johnson & Johnson, another 2.7 million of AstraZeneca. So we're looking at a very significant number of vaccines that have already gotten here, and we are waiting for an additional 1.75 million of Moderna vaccines. And then we will also be receiving an additional number of shipments of AstraZeneca. So that is something that has been obviously very helpful for Mexico. We're very thankful with the administration of President Biden. And the second set of issues where we've been working together, Mexico is working jointly with other countries, particularly with Argentina, to have production of vaccines in our own country. We're doing the fill and finish, and Argentina is doing the active substance. So in this process, we've also worked with the US administration to facilitate the export of critical inputs that the laboratory that is doing this process in Mexico are needed for this production.
Thank you very much. And now turning to the economic effects of the pandemic, especially given the reduced mobility across international borders, and with Mexico being the top foreign destination for US travelers, what have been some of the resulting economic effects in our countries?
Well, obviously, as every other country, Mexico is going to a very deep and significant economic crisis that started with this pandemic. Fortunately, now we're right now in the track to a recovery. Right now, we have more formal jobs that we had by the beginning of the pandemic. So the recovery is going very well. And obviously, there's still a lot of work to do, but it's moving along well. There are some sectors that have been particularly impacted by the pandemic, as is the case, for example, of tourism. As you mentioned, tourism is the main economic activity of several states in Mexico, mainly Canadian and United States tourists. And well, the different restrictions in air travel and the obvious situation in the two countries has made it very hard in some cases for these touristic destinations to receive the tourists. Right now, that is recovering as well because of the vaccines. But for example, during last year, where we had months where naturally we had no tourists in for example, Cancun, Los Cabos, Puerto Vallarta, very famous touristic destinations, and that created, hardship for the communities in those cities. But right now we're seeing this recovery. Canada is to reopen travel with Mexico very soon for vaccinated travelers. And in the case of the United States, we actually don't have any air travel restrictions besides the mandate to have a COVID test before the flight. So it is recovering well, and in other sectors, well, what we're trying to do is to use the USMCA and this high-level economic dialogue as tools to strengthen this economic recovery, to give it an additional impulse to what is already happening in the country. And hopefully, if we move ahead with the vaccination program, if we move ahead with the implementation of the USMCA and this high-level economic dialogue, the next year will be much better than this one.
Thank you. I'd like to remind our audience we'll be taking your questions soon. You can submit those at ccga.live. For our next question, Secretary Blinken spoke with the Foreign Secretary last month regarding migration as well as efforts to promote democracy and human rights throughout the region. Can you tell us more about that call, and how can Mexico and the US work together on all of these important issues?
Well, migration is obviously one of the most complex issues that the two countries are dealing with. We have a significant economic crisis in many countries, as I mentioned before, and there's no difference in Central America and in some other areas of Latin America. We had a very, very difficult time in Central America last year with two Category 4 hurricanes, Iota and Delta, that hit very hard these countries. And then we had also this economic crisis created by the pandemic. So the economic situation is tenuous. Obviously, there are many other problems, as it is also the case in southern Mexico and in some other areas of our country. So firstly, what Mexico has been saying is, let's work together to address the structural causes, the root causes of migration. We discussed that with the previous administration, with the Trump administration, with limited success, because we were able to launch some programs, for example, together with the Development Finance Corporation that amounts to investments for several $100 million. But now with the Biden administration, we believe that we have much more in common in this particular area of attending the root causes of migration. So we've been working together with the Office of the Vice President, with the Secretary of State, Secretary Blinken, with the National Security Council, with USAID, and with several other agencies of the US government to take a look at what can we do together in Central America and in Southern Mexico to bring investments, to foster economic development. And part of what Mexico has been saying is we also need to do some programs that bring short-term relief, immediate relief for the people, the potential migrants in these countries, because many of the development programs are obviously long-term. But what we have is an economic crisis, a crisis that is hitting right now. So we've been saying, well, how can we have some programs that have an immediate impact that help us bridge this gap between what is happening now and some of the projects that we're working for in the long term. Then also we have the migration flows and what happens daily at the border, and what happens with organized crime that is handling people, the human traffickers and the human smugglers. So that is another big area of collaboration. Firstly, we've been analyzing jointly these flows and looking at how we can promote migration that is orderly, secure, and obviously with respect to human rights and obviously regular as well. And then we are also trying to work very, very closely on dismantling these international organizations that are putting people in danger. What we see every day is that they transport, for example, people in the boxes of trucks, which puts them in great risk, particularly when they are not equipped to transport people. So there's a significant risk of asphyxiation and dehydration in this situation. And a lot of people are left alone in the desert, particularly in this time of the year where the temperatures are extremely high. So we see, unfortunately and very sadly, everyday people who die in the desert trying to make this journey. And another thing that is very sad is that we see children that are being left alone in the border and that are being handled with this great irresponsibility. So that is another big area of collaboration, and it's part of the talks that we've had, not only with Secretary Blinken, with whom we had a meeting a couple of months ago in Costa Rica, and then Secretary Baird and Secretary Blinken have had several phone calls, but also with Vice President Harris and her team, with the National Security Council, with Jake Sullivan, Juan Gonzalez, and other people from their team, with the Homeland Security Department, and with several other people within the US administration. It's a big area of collaboration, and well, it occupies a lot of my time, a lot of our time, but we believe that at the core, we share a very similar version. So what we're trying to do now is to think, how can we implement that shared vision?
Thank you very much. The Mexican government recently took legal action against several American firearms makers and distributors. Can you tell us more about this legal action and Mexico's strategy in pursuing it? And what's the current state of cross-border firearms trafficking?
Well, the current state of cross-border firearms trafficking is, you have a constant flow of weapons to Mexico from the United States. And I'm not talking about handguns. I'm talking about military-grade weapons, assault rifles, automatic weapons. For example, one that is very popular right now between organized crime members are the Barrett caliber 50, which are weapons that are really wreaking havoc in Mexico in the hands of organized crime. They are creating a lot of violence in our country. So we're looking at all the options that we have to address this problem. Naturally, we're doing our own homework in our country, trying to have additional surveillance in our border and to apply our laws and to prosecute people who are found in this business. But we've also been working with the government of the United States at the bilateral level on what actions can we have jointly and what actions can the US take to put a rein to this problem, which is creating so much death in Mexico. And then, well, this action that we spent the last 2 years preparing, is directed not at the government of the United States. It's not a government-to-government issue. It's a lawsuit that is directed against the weapon makers that, from our perspective, are incurring in negligent sales practices that have a direct impact in our country, an economic impact in our country. So our view is that BLACA applies in the United States, but that it does not have an extraterritorial application. So we are suing these companies for damages that these weapons have created in Mexico. That is the basis of the demand. And I have to say that there's a very solid legal team, both in Mexico and the United States. The head is Alejandro Celorio, our head legal counselor, but also some very solid lawyers in the United States that have been working in this lawsuit. And we're gonna see where it ends. But naturally also, it is another way for Mexico to, highlight the effects that these weapons have outside the borders of the United States. And it is important that in the debate that you are having internally of the United States, to take into account these side effects that it has outside the borders of your country. We are respectful of the Second Amendment and of the US, of the sovereignty to determine its own laws. But this is something that is not having an effect within the United States. It's having an effect outside of the United States, and that's the point we're trying to highlight, Matt.
Thank you very much. And before we turn to audience questions, you have very deep ties to the American Midwest, going back to your time at the University of Chicago. Can you tell us more about the relationship between Mexico and the Midwest US? And are there any areas in which you feel Mexico and the Midwest have an opportunity to further strengthen their relationship, whether it's through economic, cultural, or political relations?
Of course, well, we have a very deep economic relationship, particularly with Michigan, because of the car industry. Naturally, this is an industry that is the definition of supply chain integration. Cars and trucks and other vehicles come from the United States, and they are, some parts are assembled here, some parts are made here, and then they go back to the United States where other parts are made and are assembled. So this is a relationship that is deep, very dynamic, and it's the state of Michigan is Mexico's third largest trading partner, and the trade balance before the pandemic was of 60 billion, which exceeds our bilateral trade with Canada, for example. So it's very, very significant. And we believe that there are great opportunities to strengthen this relationship. For example, in the case of the transformation to the electric vehicles, we want to take a look at that and see how we can have, the United States, Mexico, and obviously Canada, which is also our partner, to be the leaders in this new industry that are the electric vehicles and all the supplies that go to these products. Then I would say that with Illinois, we share another kind of relationship. With Illinois, we have the second largest community of Mexicans in the United States, particularly in the Chicago area. It's a vibrant community, you know that very well, that does many things, that is fostering trade between our two countries, that is creating art, creating a lot of different products and businesses. So we are taking a look all the time to how we can, empower this community, how we can connect them to their roots in Mexico in the case of second and third generations, and how we can support the most vulnerable that are maybe first generation Mexicans that are in the United States, and some of them have been there for decades, but they are still undocumented, and some of them are facing very difficult situations, for example, with the pandemic. So we've also been looking at how we can support them. And you mentioned also the cultural and educational exchanges. Well, that's another issue that we believe our community is fundamental for, particularly when it comes to the cultural affairs, how we can promote that the art that our community is creating in the United States is known here in Mexico, that people in Mexico are aware that all of this is happening with some of our nationals abroad. And obviously to connect them with Mexican creators and to connect the Mexican creators with the community in the United States. When it comes to education, well, we have deep ties with several universities in the Midwest, as is the case with the University of Chicago, where I had the privilege to study. And not only the University of Chicago, but several other universities in the area. And we are taking a look, for example, at the high-level economic dialogue and how we can promote, greater workforce development between the two countries, greater skill development, and certainly we're going to try to have universities in the Midwest to be included in this effort. And well, those are some general comments. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. We now have time for some questions from the audience. And as a reminder to those watching live, you can submit your questions at ccga.live. Our first question is, Ken Salazar was recently confirmed by the US Senate to serve as US Ambassador to Mexico. What are some of your priorities to collaborate with him during his time as ambassador?
Well, we're very much looking forward to receiving Ambassador Salazar here in Mexico City. I'm sure he'll be here very soon. And that is something that we are very optimistic about, because we know about his experience, we know about his relationship with President Biden. So I'm sure he's going to be a great interlocutor for the Mexican government. Some of the priorities, I think, were defined by the two presidents in the conversations that they had, the three conversations that they had. We're mainly looking at 6 areas. Economic recovery, then recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, cooperation for development, migration, security, and climate change. Those are the main 6 issues that we're working together on, and I'm sure that those will be the priorities that we will be discussing first with Ambassador Salazar.
Great. Thank you very much. Our next question from the audience: where do you see the Mexico-US relationship in 10 years?
Well, you know, it's hard to say, and let me say why. If you had walked to a room 30 years ago and said, you know, Mexico is going to be the US largest trading partner in the world, surpassing every country in Europe, every country in Asia, and even Canada, probably people would have looked at you and said, what are you talking about? How come Mexico is going to be our largest trading partner? But that is the case now. Mexico is the largest trading partner of the United States. And we have, you know, the largest community of Mexicans living abroad in the United States. But we also have now the largest community of US people living abroad in Mexico. We have over 1 million, between 1 million and 2 million US citizens that are living in Mexico. So that gives you an idea of the very rapid change of the relationship. So I don't know exactly how it's going to look like, but I'm sure that the integration is a process that is going to keep happening because of all the people that are, you know, traveling between our countries, because of all the people that are living in the other country, because of all the trade that is already going on, and because of all the different advantages that companies are finding in this trade. Because Mexico already, you know, has a lot of businesses here, investments from the United States, and a lot of Mexican investments are in the United States, but there's still a lot of potential for this to be deepened. So again, I don't know where exactly it's going to be, but I think it's going to be a closer relationship. I think it's going to be a relationship that is going to be even more complex than what we have now. And I also believe that next year, actually, the US and Mexico will celebrate 200 years of diplomatic relations. So that will be, if I remember correctly, on December 20th of next year, which is the date in 1822 when Minister Sosaya presented his credentials to the Department of State in the US, and Mexico was one of the first countries to recognize Mexico as an independent country. And why I'm saying this, because we have now, and in 10 years, we will have 210 years of experience dealing with each other. So I think every year we become a little bit better. So I'm sure that the relationship will follow that path.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time. Mr. Velasco, I'd like to thank you. It's been an honor to welcome you at our first inaugural Hart Program Series on Latin America speaker. I'd like to again extend our thanks to Ambassador Torres and her wonderful team at the consulate in Chicago. And thank you again to Rob and Kitty Lansing for their generous support and their family's generous support to make this series possible. We're looking forward to hosting more discussions on the region and also about Mexico-US ties. So thank you so much for all of your insight today.
Thank you very much, Matt, again for the invitation. It was my pleasure to be able to speak to you, to have the honor to be the first speaker in this series. And I hope that the next time we'll be actually in Chicago.
Thank you again.
Thank you.